faces, maskless faces, to hear us all singing out nice and loud this morning. Getting the fingers. Can you hear me? All right, babies, Bible class, and moms, you guys can get going. All right, let's start off with a little introduction to our story this morning. We are continuing the series on the moral of the story. Are you guys cold? Are those hands cold? Holding somebody's hand next to you. Just hold some stranger's hand on the other side. No. All right, I need 3 volunteers. That's why we've got people in the front row. Can I have you? Can I have you, TK? Mike, sorry, you're in the front. Okay, we got 3 individuals here, and I'm going to paint a little picture, and you can feel free to put yourself in their shoes too this morning. Okay, one day, these 3 colleagues who work together rock up at their place of work, and they come into the foyer of their beautiful, big corporate place. They come into the foyer, and as they arrive, I mean, they're looking sharp, they're looking smart, they're looking like they're going to do some work today. They're trying to impress some people, and they get into the lift, ding, and it opens up, and there's like quite a lot of people inside, and they get in. Okay, that's perfect. You're in the lift now, thank you. And you make yourself at home awkwardly staring at the ceiling, and all of a sudden, the people part, and you realize that these aren't just normal employees. These are bodyguards parting, and there's somebody very important stuck at the back of the lift. And you gasp. That's that dude, that guy, what's his name again? The guy, he was South African, but he went over to America. He builds spaceships, and he electric cars. What's his name? Jacob Zuma. What? Not the guy who steals money, the guy who invests money. Elon Musk. Okay, and we see Elon Musk, and Elon Musk turns around, and he's not looking at the floor, at the ceiling. He's looking at you 3. And this has now become very awkward. Why is Elon Musk in this lift, and why is he looking at us? And he says, I'm so glad you guys could join us this morning. Please stop the lift. We have something very important to talk to you about. Ding! And you guys are now stopped in between the 14th and the 15th floor. What is going on? He says, this is highly classified information, but we have found a way to get to Mars. And I am going to be going to Mars. I'm going to be leading the expedition. And I'm going to be building a new human settlement on Mars. Firstly, thanks. I know you guys would offer to come with me. That's not what I want you to do. But I've been spying on you 3. I've been tracking you with a highly sophisticated combination of satellite imagery, of your browsing history online, of utilizing the microphone on your phone. And I'm going to tell you straight away that I like you guys. And what I've seen is good. And so I want you 3 to handle some investments for me while I go to Mars. Okay? I'm going to be giving you 150 million rand. I'm going to be giving you 60 million rand, and I'm going to be giving you 30 million rand. Now, there's no contracts, there's no signatures, but I'm entrusting you guys to invest this money for me while I go away. I don't know how long I'm going to be. It could be years, it could be decades. But when I come back, I want to see how you have invested this money for growth and for good. Okay? It's in your Bitcoin bank account wallet. Okay? Now go. Ding! And the lift exited, and you guys were kicked out of the lift, and you can go back to your chairs. Thank you very much. And the question is, What would you do with all of that money that got put into your Bitcoin wallet? Does anybody say, jeepers, what is a Bitcoin wallet? And how would I get the money out of a Bitcoin wallet? I think that would be my first question. The question is, what would we do if we had been placed in that position? If we had been invested in that kind of way? And so we are going to take a look this morning at a parable in which Jesus has a very similar situation. Matthew 25, verse 14. I want to ask if you can open your Bibles if you have them. I think we do have some verses on the screen to follow along. I'm going to read out of the New Living Translation, and it says this. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a trip. He called together his servants and gave them money to invest for him while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of gold to one, 2 bags of gold to another, and 1 bag of gold to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. And then he left on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of gold immediately began to invest the money and soon doubled it. The servant with 2 bags of gold also went right to work and doubled the money. But the servant who received the 1 bag of gold dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money for safekeeping. After a long time, their master returned from his trip, and he called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted 5 bags of gold said, "Sir, you gave me 5 bags of gold to invest, and I have doubled the amount." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Next came the servant who received the 2 bags of gold with the report, "Sir, you gave me 2 bags of gold to invest, and I have doubled the amount." The master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling the small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." Then the servant with the 1 bag of gold came. Dun, 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 and said, "Sir, I know you are a hard man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth, and here it is." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. You think I'm a hard man, do you? Harvesting crops I didn't plant, gathering crops I didn't cultivate? Well, you should have at least put the money into the bank so I could have earned some interest. Take the money from the servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of gold. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who are unfaithful, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Does anybody know what the sound of gnashing of teeth is? It's not a pleasant sound. Not a pleasant sound. What an imagery there at the end. So what is this parable about? Let's start with some background and some context. And I'm going to come clean and tell you that when I chose this parable to preach on a week or 2 ago, I had a very different sermon in my head to what I'm going to be preaching on today. And part of that is because of an understanding of the background and the context and where this parable actually fits in to Jesus' teachings that I had overlooked. Has anybody heard this story before, this parable before? It's quite a well-known parable because there's some really practical advice here and application here about stewardship. right? And my context of this was that this parable was primarily about working hard, being diligent, making the most of what God's given us, and being very worried that I'd maybe buried a talent. Because we saw how the master treated the servant who'd buried their talent. And I didn't want to be the guy who'd buried his talent. Like, what happened if you had this undiscovered talent for like decoupage or something like that, and you just never used it? You never unearthed it. And when you got into heaven one day and you stood before the master, he said, I gave you this talent, and you buried it. I mean, this is concerning stuff. So let's look, who was Jesus speaking to? Jesus was speaking primarily to his disciples here, okay? So the context of this, if we start a chapter back, this is chapter 25, so if we start in chapter 24, Jesus is sitting with his disciples on the Mount of Olives, and a whole lot of stuff has happened. Jesus has gone into Jerusalem, he's knocked over some money changers, and he's now talking about the end of the age, and he said that the temple in Jerusalem will be destroyed. And his disciples are saying, Jesus, help us understand. When is this going to happen? What's going to happen? What does this look like? And Jesus had also talked about the fact that he was going to be leaving soon, but that one day he would be returning. And the disciples were very interested to know, what is this all about? What does this mean? So Jesus launches into something that scholars have called the sermon of the end of the world. And it's a sermon in which Jesus starts to unpack some of these questions that the disciples have asked him. And it's a sermon where Jesus largely focuses on what it means to be watchful and waiting for Jesus' return while we are here serving him, and what it means to be ready for him. And the culmination of the sermon of the end of the world is a series of parables, okay? And the parable directly after the parable of the talents that we're looking at today is the parable of the sheep and the goats, in which Jesus, as the shepherd, separates out the sheep who have followed Jesus and his ways from the goats who have merely pretended to follow Jesus. And he separates those out. The parable directly before the parable of the talents is the parable of the 10 bridesmaids, where they were getting ready for the bridegroom to come, and they needed to have oil in their lamps, and some of them didn't have them. And that parable ends with this verse, in verse 13, which says this: so stay awake and be prepared, because you do not know the day or the hour of my return. So these are the bookends that we have around this parable of the talents. Speaking of Jesus' return, and what do we do while we wait for Jesus to return? So if the parable of the 10 bridesmaids was about the importance of being ready, the parable of the talents is about how we get ready and what it means to be ready for Jesus to return. So let's dive in. I want to give you some thoughts about what some of these things might mean, and then we're going to talk about how does this apply to our lives. So we've got this master who is Jesus, who's going on a trip, and he's coming back after a long time. So given the context here, we understand this to be referring to Jesus having been here on earth, having ascended into heaven, and the fact that he is coming back one day. Now, we don't know how long that's going to be. Just this parable talks about it as a long trip. But we know that the Bible talks about his coming soon and us being prepared and waiting. And Paul covered this in some of the teaching that we've done recently on heaven and being ready for him. But one thing that I do know is that the message remains the same for us. Whether he comes while we are here alive, or whether we leave this earth before he comes, but we go in to meet him, the principle is the same, that we have a window of opportunity here on earth to serve the Master, and he has entrusted something to us. So, in my translation, in the New Living Translation here, it says he gave bags of gold. Some translations say bags of silver. And the actual word there is talent. And that's why we have this thing called the parable of the talents. Now, the word talent to the listeners of the day had no connotation or meaning to do with one's abilities, one's giftings, the fact that you can do decoupage or singing or something like that. The word talent was simply a measure of weight, like a kilogram. Now, the scholars give a range. They say this, the science was not lacquer precise back in the day, so we don't have an exact understanding, but it was roughly 30 to 35 kilograms of weight. Do you know what 35 kilograms of gold equates to? I mean, I did the maths, Silver, still an impressive amount, but gold, looking at the exchange rate of 16.5, looking at the price, 17,500 per ounce, multiply that into pounds, and then multiply that into kilograms, and roughly speaking, one talent would be 30 million rands worth. 2 talents, 60 million rands worth. 5 talents, 150 million rands worth. Now, that's just me doing the maths. Now, what it meant to the people of the time might have been slightly different, and we can get another idea that roughly this was about 20 years worth of labor. 20 years worth of your earnings in your career is what one talent was worth. So this was a sizable amount of money that the Master was investing here. Now we see the language and the imagery here in this passage of investment. Commercial language here. The Master invested in his servants. So he is positioned as an investor, right? Making an investment into his servants, who then in turn become investors themselves, because they are charged with the responsibility to invest this wealth in order to make a return. And they are faced then with the choice of how they invest and what they do. Okay? Do they, A, spend it? I was looking for press stick, but I don't have any. Can I ask Mike, can you just come and hold these for me here? You haven't been on stage enough yet this morning. Do they, A, spend it? Actually, I need you on this side of the, okay? B, do they save it? Christine, please, thank you. Okay. Russell, can you come up here? Or do they C, invest it? Right? Now, we've got a bit of a continuum here, okay, that you can see. In terms of money, if we talk in very, very basic terms, when we have a sum of money, we have these options that we can do with money, all right? We can spend money, and we all need to spend money to live and to survive and to buy food and clothes and all of that sort of stuff, okay? But spending money means that it eventually runs out. We're using it, right, for something, okay? The next step here is that maybe you don't spend it all. And so you save some money, or you preserve some money. Now, that preserving might look like sticking it under your bed or in a couch, maybe. Or it might look like burying it in the ground. It might even look like putting it in a bank account and earning 2% interest, okay? The idea with the safety is that you've preserved it, you've protected it, you've kept it constant. At least, hopefully, it's growing at inflation. But if it's under your bed, then it's not doing anything, right? The next level on this continuum is investing. And now here, with investing, there's an element of creativity, of deploying funds in a way that you put money to work so that it grows. So that there is growth and hopefully eventually multiplication, compounding growth, right? Can you see the continuum here of how we spend our money? So if I had to ask you on this continuum, where would you say there is the highest level of effort and diligence required?
You've got to find a good place to hide it.
Okay, spending, how much effort and diligence required? Well, I mean, it depends how much you have. If you've got to spend 150 million rand, it takes a little bit of doing, right? Okay, a little bit of effort. Saving, well, if you had to go and find a place to protect 30 kilograms of gold, hey, that's you got to carry that. You need some biceps for that. You got to find a place to hide it that nobody else has seen in the middle of the night. Hey, you got to find a place to bury it. That's a big hole you've got to dig, right? So there's a little bit of effort here. Whoa. But here we're talking about creative, emotional energy, trusting for a good idea, looking for the right businesses, starting a business, looking for opportunities, managing those opportunities over the long haul, making sure that businesses are doing what they're supposed to do and that there's a return in place, right? Back to this continuum. Where would you say we have the potential for the most return here? Invest, right? Spend, not applicable, no return. Save, probably 0%, 2%. Invest, the sky's the limit, right? The sky's the limit. Money could double, but if it doubles every year, that's exponential growth, okay? Where would you say there's the most risk on this continuum? Invest. Because what happens if you invest in a business that goes belly up, right? What happens if you started a new business just before COVID? And it was a terrible time and it was out of your control. You did nothing wrong. There's circumstances that took it out of your control. Okay? So can you see that there is a continuum here and we are delving into this level of language in this parable? Thank you so much, guys. You can sit down. Thank you for being my clipboards here. The crux of the story happens when the master returns and he calls the servants to account. Everybody say account. What have you done with the opportunity that I've given you? Can you imagine what this master was doing? Do you think he was a hard master, calling them into an office and making it very awkward for them? Or do you think he was excited to find out, what have you done with this opportunity that I gave you? What did you do? What creative ideas? What new investments? What businesses? What great innovations did you come up with this amazing investment, with this opportunity of a lifetime? I'd love to hear. Come, let's talk. Come and show me. And we see that the first servant comes and he gives an account. And imagine the smile on his face as he was able to say, Master, I doubled your money. And what is the master's response? Joy, happy. He commends him. He praises him. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Well done. Because of what you've done with this little, note the word that the master uses to describe that 150 million rand investment, potentially. little. So this man, you know, if we talk about Elon Musk, 150 million rand, come on, is like a rounding error for this guy, right? So what you have done with little has enabled me to entrust you, and you will be given much more responsibility. So he praised him. He indicated that there was going to be trust given and more responsibility given. And then he says, come, let's celebrate together. Come, another translation says, and enter my joy. And this is where we see a change in the language. This is no longer commercial language. We see a change in the slave and master dynamic here. And Jesus is showing that there's a principle here which translates into a spiritual truth that what happened with the faithfulness of the servant translated into a result that was beyond just a commercial result. The commercial result would have been, great, here's your cut, you get 10%, you can catch it on the way out. Cheers, we'll see you again for the next investment. No, the master said, come, let's celebrate together. Come, enter my joy. Come and be with me. There's a relational tone to that result, right? So what happens to the second? The second servant only had 2 bags, but what did he do? He also put it to work. He also invested it. He also doubled it. And the master was just as happy with what he had done and what he'd produced, and says the exact same thing. Well done, my good and faithful servant. Because you've been faithful with little, you'll be given much more. Come and celebrate with me. Come and enter my joy. So we see there's a pattern here, right? There's a pattern. Until the third servant comes in. And let's see what the third servant says. Let's go back here. Verse 24. The first servant comes out swinging. The first servant doesn't start by giving an account. The first servant comes out attacking the master. He says this, Sir, I know you are a hard man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. The master's come and said, I'm so excited to hear what you've done with this opportunity. Come, show me. Come and tell me. And the first thing the master gets hit with is the servant attacking him, attacking his character, saying, you're a hard man. You harvest what you didn't plant. Whew. But I planted a talent with you, the master could have said. Show me your evidence, the master could have said. In fact, if we look at the evidence and we do our own fact check, let's do our own little fact check on this disinformation campaign that the third servant was trying to purport here. Was the master a hard man who harvested where he didn't plant? Or was the master a man who planted? He planted an investment with the servants. And he wanted to harvest what he had planted. But not only that, but he was a generous man and a man who wanted to include the servants as partners when he said, come, let's celebrate together. Come and enter my joy as a partner with me. Is that evidence of a hard man? Or was that evidence of a good master, of a generous master, of an investor that had a heart to see these people use their gifts? Then came the excuse. I was afraid to lose your money, and I acted in fear. And what is Jesus' response to this third servant? What does he call him? He calls the first two good and faithful. The third one he calls wicked and lazy. Wicked and lazy. So lazy, wow, okay, that makes sense. That's quite easy to see. He was lazy. He didn't invest. He put the money in the ground. He didn't do too much with it. But wicked is quite a strong term. Was the servant wicked for not investing? He didn't spend it, right? The servant could have taken that money and run. That was probably more money than he'd ever seen in his entire life, right? That guy could have run away and spent the rest of his life on a little island south of Mexico. I don't know if there are any islands south of Mexico. But he could have gotten away, right? But he didn't. He preserved the money. He put it in the ground, okay? So why does Jesus call this man wicked? Why does he take away his 1 talent and give it to the servant with 10? Why does he throw him into the outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth? We've got this strong contrast here between the faithful servant and the wicked servant. The faithful servant trusted the heart of the master. Trusted the master's intentions for him, accepted and received the responsibility of the investment that was placed with him. Understood that the master had taken a risk on him, that the master must have seen something in him, that the master believed in him in order to place an investment of that magnitude with him. I see what you could be. I see what you could do with this. And the first two servants responded to that with faithfulness. They were willing to take a risk. They were willing to put the money to work. They were willing to do what was asked of them. The wicked servant was clouded. His heart was clouded by his misperception for the master, his misunderstanding of the master's heart. He saw the master as a hard man. He was skeptical of the master's intentions towards him. He was skeptical of this investment. He missed the heart. He missed the fact that the master believed in him. I'm giving you this money because I'm investing in you, because I believe you've got what it takes to make something of this money when I get back. This is the opportunity I'm giving you. And the fact that you mistrusted me and you misunderstood me and all you did was bury it breaks my heart. Breaks my heart because you missed the opportunity. And it's not just that you missed the opportunity, but you misunderstood me as the master. The second contrast we have is the contrast of the end result, where the master says, "Come and enter into my joy," versus cast him out into outer darkness, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. The relationship, the being in the presence of the master, the sharing in partnership with the master versus separation, versus being distanced. The weeping and the gnashing of teeth is a reference to hell. A place of despair, a place of separation from Jesus. Sure, what a contrast. So what does this all mean for us? What does this mean for you and I? What is the moral of the story? And I used to think that this parable could be summed up as use it or lose it. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it, buddy. Or double or nothing. You're either going to double it or there's nothing. And if there's nothing, gnashing of teeth. not lacquer. But I think that there's a deeper question here. I think that there's a deeper level happening here. And I think that question is this: how will I respond to the immeasurable wealth of the good news of Jesus? How will we respond to the immeasurable wealth of the good news of Jesus? If we're sitting here in this place this morning, there's a good chance that we have been exposed and we have some concept and some understanding of what it is to say that there's good news, and his name is Jesus. There is hope for the world, and his name is Jesus. There's a king who came for us, and his name is Jesus. And some of us might just be getting exposed to that for the first time or early on. Some of us might have been walking that journey for a long time. But the question to us, in the window of opportunity that we have here on earth before Christ's return, is how will we respond to that investment that the Master has given us? Will we respond faithfully? Will we take the message of Jesus, take the ways of Jesus, take his grace, and by his Spirit invest it into our lives, seeing our lives changed, seeing fruit in our lives, seeing us become the people that God has destined us to be? And will we allow that fruit to overflow and actually be an investment into others around us? Or will we respond without faith to this gift because maybe we mistrust it? Maybe we mistrust the source of this grace because of our experiences, because of how we've grown up, what we've been taught about who the Father is, who the Master is. We don't understand his heart towards us. We don't understand why he's calling us to use this gift of faith. And so it's easier to just keep that good news at bay. It's easier to just keep it on the side, bury it underground. I'm not destroying it. I'm not attacking it, but I'm not going to let it infiltrate my heart and change me. Because that takes a lot of effort. That takes a lot of sacrifice. That's risky. But if I just bury it in the ground and I don't respond to this message of Jesus, well then, I don't have to do any of that. There's less effort involved. But if I do that, it can't be put to work in me. And it can't be put to work through me. And there can be no growth and no life of Jesus' truths in me. He didn't squander it. He didn't destroy it. But he didn't use it. And he missed out on the incredible gift that was intended for him by the Master. So this parable is less about our success, our growth, how much we've done with what God has given us. And it's more about us responding in faithfulness to his calling on our lives. In this window of opportunity that we have, and I don't know how long I've got. I could be run over by a car tomorrow. I could have another, I was going to say 70 years, but we'd need some good medical breakthroughs for that to happen. For all of us here today, we don't know. We don't know how much time we have. But we've all got a window of opportunity. And when that servant got his 5 bags of gold, what does the scripture say? It says he went immediately and put it to work. He didn't let it simmer. He didn't wait for another year. He went immediately and put it to work. And we have that choice to make every single day. We can choose to respond to the gospel today and put it to work in our lives. Put it to work in my marriage. Put it to work in my relationships. Put it to work in the difficult situation that I'm facing right now. Put it to work in my ways, in my priorities, in my spending, in my budget. I've got these choices to make every single day. That is the level that I believe that this parable is talking about. Faithfulness to the ways of Jesus in our lives. A British journalist once asked Mother Teresa, "How do you keep going, knowing that you can't meet all the needs of the dying in Calcutta?" She replied, "I'm not called to be successful. I'm called to be faithful." I don't think the Father is as interested in our success as He's interested in our faithfulness. The desire of our hearts to keep growing in alignment with Him. The desire in our hearts to keep journeying towards Him. And sometimes risky investments take a dip. If any of you guys have ever invested anything, especially in the most recent past, you would have seen that sometimes risky investments take a dip. And I sometimes think, God, when you look at my life, do you see red numbers or do you see green numbers? Because I feel like you might be seeing red numbers sometimes in my life. You might be seeing that investment not looking like as fruitful as it could be. But you know what? God positioned Himself as an investor. If He'd wanted to put it in the bank, He would have put it in the bank Himself. No, He came to invest it in us, in you and me. He came to take a risk on you and me. And a good investor knows that investments will go through cycles. There'll be times when we feel like, oh my goodness, I've missed it. But I have the choice to step back into faithfulness. Step back into alignment. Step back into devotion to the Father. So we're going to end it there this morning. And we're going to give ourselves